Hey, welcome to the pre-show. Anyone who's out there yet? We're getting there. Oh, listen to this. Yeah. Whew. I got another one too. I crack them both. So I've got two. One for drinking, the other for drinking. So, yeah, I've got one of these. Here, let me take the graphic down for tonight. We started 3 minutes after the top of the hour, by the way, for those of you who haven't been here for a while or who have never been here before. So at 9:03, we go live on the radio station. That's when the show officially starts. Right now, it's just the pre-show. So I'm getting prepped. Let me remove that graphic. And let's get a little more set up here. We'll get our banner going. Boom. And let's get our all our surrounding junk going here. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, baby. There we go. There's our incidentals. We got about 45 seconds. We start. By the way, I'm just going to start drinking one of these babies. Little zero sugar Mike's Hard Lemonade for tonight's show. And we'll wash that down with a sugar-free Mountain Dew later. So, how's everybody tonight? We're going to go dark in just a few seconds here, and then we'll be back live to go live on the radio at the top of the hour here, or 3 minutes after, and 9 seconds. Stand by.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey, folks, welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday evening. I'm Scotty Roberts, your host. This is my program, my broadcast, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can also see us in simulcast on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And you can go over to my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Scotty Roberts. Come on over. You can help the cause. You can help support this show by throwing in about the price of a cup of coffee once a month over on my Patreon. That will help us do bigger and better things around here. So I want to thank you, all those of you who do that already, and anybody else who would like to come on in and do it. So good evening to everybody gathering over in the chat room. And if you're not in the chat room yet and you're just listening, you can come on over to the YouTube page, join the chat room. You're going to have to forgive what will be eventually in the next few minutes, I'm sure, my crackling voice. I still have that chest cold infection thing that has been going around here. I had it all last week, and it's now still Wednesday of this week, and I still got the cough. And every now and then when I'm taking a breath, I feel that rattle coming up and hitting the back of my throat. So we'll see. You can count the coughs because I'm not going to use my cough button. And it's just what it is. So welcome to everybody. Rudy Dog, good to see you. Claudette, good to see you. Rendell Flag, Johan, Dancing Gypsy. Ole. Oh, wait, that's not Gypsy. So, I just got an announcement on my computer to be ready to start my show at 9 p.m. 5 minutes late. Thank you for that announcement, computer system. And Susie Q, good to see you. And who else we got in here? We got a few more of you. Did I miss somebody? And so anyway, welcome to the program. And as you come in, if I miss your name and I don't say hi, don't take it personally. I just don't always look over there at the chat room while I'm going off. So I've got a couple of things I want to talk about tonight. First, the topic for tonight, we're going to get into that. Here's the graphic if you didn't see it. It's downright wonky Old Testament laws. And the Old Testament law says you have to cut off what when you do what? So that's the show for tonight. And we'll see how that, well, here, you can't see it because the whole banner thing is up there. Let's take that down so you can see it. Boom, there it is. So that's tonight's banner. That's what we're going to be talking about. But there was something else I saw, too, that I wanted to just mention at the beginning of the show tonight. Let's see if I've still got it up here. Yes. This whole idea of, you heard, I've got to talk about this because it's current events and it's big and it's going to be history someday. The whole thing about, well, the Republicans are now planning to do an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden. And of course, all you're seeing in the leftist media is the exact opposite. Obviously, it's a political game, but the exact opposite of what you heard when they tried to impeach. Well, when the House impeached Trump twice, but the Senate vacated it both times. And now the left is calling this a witch hunt. And then Republicans are criticizing Republicans of the House and the Senate for not moving faster. And I want to make one thing clear. Understand what's happening here is that there's been a lot of evidence that's been pulled up. And McCarthy has now just simply come out and said, we're going to launch an impeachment inquiry. That's not an official charge of impeachment. They're not trying to impeach him yet. They're looking to see if the evidence supports it. This is the process. Now, remember when Trump first was brought up on impeachment charges, they didn't even announce an impeachment inquiry. Nobody even knew about it until Pelosi was announcing we're impeaching him. And they didn't have an inquiry. And so this is the proper way to get things done. And they're looking in to see, does the evidence we have merit? It looks like it. Otherwise, we wouldn't launch an inquiry. So let's find out. And they're talking about all the time. And I've heard a lot of people on the left saying, they got no evidence. There's nothing. And those people are either deliberately lying to you, deliberately obfuscating the truth and the facts, or they don't know what they're talking about, because there's plenty of evidence that one way, if you're on the left and you don't like any of this, do this. Switch the names out. Instead of Biden, put Trump in there. Instead of Biden's kid, put Trump's kid in there. Just for a hypothetical exercise. And then ask yourself, if you heard any of the same things said about Trump, would you be going, that man's got to be taken down, taken out of office? That's a good test. That's a litmus test for you. Interchange Biden's name with Trump and see if you would have supported it at that time. So here's what you got going on right now. So I just wanted to go through very quickly. There's all this talk out there of, I saw it in everywhere, all the way down to George Takei's Instagram, which is just, I follow it. I started following George Takei because he played Lieutenant Sulu in the original Star Trek. And so I followed him for years. And then he started getting hyper political during the Trump years. And I could just walk away from him, but I like to see what he's having to say. He's merely an activist, a far leftist activist that is there. You think I stirred the pot? Go listen to George Takei. He's just trying to stir the pot. But even he was mentioning this thing you're hearing a lot about now is the 14th Amendment. Well, maybe Trump can't run at all because of the 14th Amendment. And so how do I want to make this sentence sound? I'm stumbling over my words because I didn't quite plan what I was going to say next. The whole 14th Amendment thing is irrelevant, and I will tell you why. Because it is for somebody. First of all, the 14th Amendment was written specifically for the Civil War. And it applied to Civil War and Confederate supporters and sympathizers. That's why the amendment was written. Is it valid today? Maybe there's principles there that are valid, but that's why it was written. If somebody is running for office, or they cannot run for office, is basically what it says, if they supported sedition and a cause to overthrow the government in post-Civil War Reconstruction era. All right. Now, while there's a lot of people on the left that are cheering for the downfall of the former president, Donald Trump, I don't believe they have a fighting chance, And the indictment, in the whole indictment process, the ruse is obvious. And if you support the indictments, you are, I don't care how smart you are. I've got good friends here that listen to this show that are smart people. You're intelligent, but please get out of your partisan box. It doesn't matter what party you are. Constitution wasn't written for a Democrat or a Republican. It was written for everyone. Step outside the box. Step outside the politics. So the ruse is obvious in these indictments. And you have to be the dumbest person on the face of the earth to be proposing this. Now, a Colorado watchdog group right now is attempting to block Trump from making it onto the 2024 ballot. There's a group in Minnesota, right across the river from me, that's trying to keep Trump's name off the 2024 ballot. And they're citing the 14th Amendment. Now, Section 3, get this. Everybody hear this. This is the stuff you can take home with you. This is, we're just doing this at the beginning of the show, so you got a little bit of information. You can now be informed. You will have no excuse. You will be informed. Section 3 of the amendment states, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, having previously taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, if they have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. You know what they meant? The Civil War. This was the context of this amendment. That's what they meant. Anyone who engaged in, participated in, gave aid and comfort to the Civil War, they were the ones who were banned from holding public office. They didn't mean for this to apply after the last Confederate died. If Trump were actually in trouble, he'd be being charged with insurrection and sedition. Guess what? He's not. He hasn't been charged with either of those things because he did not do either of those things. And there's some things I want you to hear. He's not being charged because, get this, everybody listen, I don't care if you like Trump or hate him. I don't care what party you're in. You're an American citizen. Listen to this. 2 days before January 6th, when this so-called insurrection took place, Trump offered 10,000 military personnel to defend the Capitol building and defend the members of Congress on January 6th. He was then turned down by guess who? The Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the Democratic Mayor of D.C. The Democrat Mayor, Democrat Speaker. Well, that's a hell of a way to run an insurrection, don't you think? They held a rump trial, let's call it, in the Senate. And they didn't come close to supermajority votes that were needed to convict Donald Trump of anything under our constitutional system. So Donald Trump was adjudicated not guilty of an insurrection or a sedition by the one body that took it up, the United States Senate. So you know what? Right now, I want you to take this to the bank, put it in your pipe and smoke it. The Senate already found Trump not guilty of sedition or insurrection. The highest legislative body of the land, the one that was involved in this. And Trump did many things to show that he was not about insurrection. And that didn't even come up till after the fact anyway, insurrection. He just wanted to be peaceful and safe. And so if you don't believe that, you're deliberately ignoring the facts. And, salve your own conscience with that if that's what you're doing. But you're in the wrong, frankly, and there's no way to really argue your way out of it if you think Trump is being rightfully brought up on these indictments. So, and as far as Joe Biden's impeachment inquiry, it's all it is. It's an inquiry. It's not an impeachment process yet. but it's part of the pre-process that needs to be done to see if impeachment ought to be entered into. So there you go. That's all I got to say about that. I wanted to bring that up as a point of news and current events that you need to think about with all this stuff going on. It doesn't matter if you like Trump or not. You better, if you're a citizen of this country, support your Constitution, because the Constitution right now supports Trump, and the Constitution needs to be followed. And the only ones clamoring for Trump to be, and as you know, and it's been said, even slipped by mentally incapacitated Joe Biden, the only reason they're doing all this indictment stuff is to keep Trump from having the ability to run for office. So there you go. You better open your eyes and connect the dots. Current events. Take that one to the bank. Use it. Share it at the office tomorrow. But think about it. Don't stop thinking about it. Think. Use your minds. Now, another place to use your minds, if you are Judeo-Christian, if you grew up in a church, many of us did, believing that the Ten Commandments were a good thing. We've got a lot of courthouses in the country that used to have the Ten Commandments on their capitol buildings or their court buildings. And there's some states that have had it removed because you can't have it because now it's a religious thing. You're promoting one religion over the other. And so, which is stupid, frankly. That's a stupid thing. And by the way, that I'll just mention this one for free. Somebody asked, do you think prayer should be reintroduced into the schools? I say no. You know what? Prayer, it should be allowed in schools, but it shouldn't be promoted by schools. Because once you have a school promoting it, then you've got, if the school is a government school, which most of the public school system is, it's government supported. You can't have the government preferring one religion over another by allowing prayer. So if you have prayer, you got to include prayer for everyone, not just one religion. And of course, state constitutions play in very heavily on this as well. So that one's for free. We aren't even going to get into that. So there's all this Levitical law, it was called. When I was in Bible college and seminary, and we started learning all about the law. What's the law that most people know about? The Ten Commandments. And but did you know that there were hundreds of other laws written all around the Ten Commandments throughout Scripture, throughout the Old Testament, that were part of the, well, let's hone it down even a little narrower. Mosaic law, the law written by Moses. Ten Commandments, all the Levitical law you find in the book of Leviticus, some in Exodus, some in Numbers and Deuteronomy, all these laws that were established for the Jewish people. And the Ten Commandments just being the ones that were, these are the most important ones, meaning the ones that stand out, and all the rest of these are all, civil laws and dietary laws and sexual laws and all these other things for running their communities and their people. So I've got a few things I want us to take a look at here. And let's see. Let me find the right thing. Right, here we go. Did you know that there are 76 different things, and we won't get through this whole list tonight in detail. I'm just going to rattle a lot of this off, and we're going to talk about it. But when I talk about all the wonky laws that were written in the Old Testament, you've got to look at it, and the first thing you've got to ask is, why are they there? If they're stupid-sounding laws, why did God write them in the first place? Why are there some people who believe that nowadays you still have to abide by Levitical law? And it's called Levitical law because you find most of it in the book of Leviticus. The Levites were the priestly caste of Israel. So the Levites, the Levitical law, Levitican law, if you want, all of that is the law that was written for God's chosen people of Israel. And there are 76 things that were banned in Leviticus. And I ran across this list not long ago. And Leviticus is a really funny book, frankly. Not ha-ha funny. It's weird funny, especially for modern Christianity. So along with Deuteronomy, swaths of Exodus and Numbers, those books, the first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote, it lays out the law for Israelites. But it's largely ignored by modern Christians because it's felt that Jesus replaced the law. Well, except for where he didn't. And that the Apostle Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. Said a lot of it didn't apply, except for the parts that did. And for all of that, many are still wanting to cite Leviticus for things that they think are sinful, while ignoring it for things that they don't agree with anymore. It's like, you remember that woman who was in the news? Don't remember her name. It was 5 or 6 years ago. She was a court clerk in some small town in the South that wasn't allowing, was it not allowing gay people to get a license to be married because she said it's against Levitical law. That was her basis for it. It's against Levitical law. It's against biblical law. And she was taking a stand for not granting these licenses because God is against homosexuals. But what came out as it made a big clang of a bell in the public news. Everybody's talking about this woman who was standing against them. And does she have a right to do that in her county? When you find out she had also been married and divorced several times. And the Bible has very strict New Testament law about marrying and divorcing, marrying, divorcing, marrying and divorcing. Strict guidelines, strict rules about it. So she was willing to cherry pick the law that she wanted to believe because she didn't like homosexuals, and the law that was inconvenient for her to believe. My own ex-wife did this and called me about something. This was, God, my kids were younger. I was already with Rainey. This had to be about 12 or 13 years ago. She started dating a man, and they were sleeping together. I don't know why my ex-wife even talked to me about it at the time. But she called me, and because my son was there. And I said, look, if my son's going to be around this guy, I either need to know who this guy is and something about him, or I'm not going to let him come and visit. And she said, well, we're together, and trust me, there's a history of that. You all know that if you've heard my stories. So she said, well, I love him, and we're together, and I just want you to know he's still not technically divorced from his ex-wife. And she said to me, so am I living in adultery? And I said, look, you have to decide. It's between you and God what you do. It's not my business. I said, I would simply ask you, are you happy? If you're happy, then figure it out. You'll figure out what to do. I said, but that's not my business to get my nose into it. I said, if you want to be with them, I'm fine with it, as long as my son is okay there. So that's kind of where that got left. But she was somebody who was very strict on other things in the Bible, and very strict on non-things in the Bible. So it was a cherry-picking process. So people tend to cherry-pick which of the Levitical laws, or for that matter, of all of the Old Testament covenant, not to mention most of the Bible, they think still apply and which parts don't. Oh, I believe in this and this and this, but I don't believe in that, that, and that. But they're all in Scripture. So how do you know which ones are right and which ones are wrong? And the cherry picking is sometimes reasoned, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's based on personal taste. And I think that's okay. So we can ignore that law. Everyone does that these days, so it must be just fine. And I think that thing over there, that's icky. So we should cite it frequently as sinful. So sometimes it's based on reasoning, comparing them to the greatest commandments as Jesus laid out, and seeing if they still seem to apply. Here's the basic rule. Remember when Jesus was alive during his ministry, and they wrote about this, if you know these stories out of the Gospels and the Bible. They came to him, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they asked him, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now, keep in mind, the people asking Jesus this question were people who promoted the temple, promoted the law, that this is Judaism. They weren't wrong in their viewpoint. They were still living under the law of Moses. They were still having sacrifice at the temple. Jesus taught at the temple. He was a rabbi. And they asked him, "What's the most important commandment?" What did Jesus reply? Get this. For those of you who think otherwise, this was Jesus' answer. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments." End of quote from Jesus. I prefer his approach to it rather than the cherry picking. So I've got a list of 17 things here out of Leviticus with some verse references, which I'll just rattle off quickly, unless you're all following along in your Bible and taking notes. It's by no means exhaustive, but as an extension of original listing, I'm going to try to include the stated penalties for each act, just in a phrase, death or dismemberment or whatever. But consider which of these you, if you're of such a persuasion, think still apply to today. If you are a Christian and a follower of God, a follower of the God of the Bible, do you believe the laws in the Bible? Do you abide by the commands in the Bible? Or those are archaic? That's not what God is all about. So in essence, what we end up doing, many people do, even those who call themselves Christians, but are really only Christianized because they attend Christian churches. It's like I've said many times, I can stand in a garage for years and never turn into a car. So you can go to church, it doesn't mean you're a Christian. You can go to synagogue, it doesn't mean you're a good Jew. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but ask yourself, do the things in the Bible, if you are a Christian, what is the source book for Christianity? The New Testament, the Bible. So if you're a Christian, do you abide by the source book? Or do you believe something else? Do you cherry pick what you believe? And I'm not trying to preach to anybody, but I am going to ask you, do you live what you say you believe? That's a big question. So some of the items, specifically the penalty or the punishment, many fall back to Leviticus chapter 4 and 5, which lists based on who commits the sin and whether they knew it was a sin or not, and what sort of sacrificial offering animal needed to be given up when they go to temple. And so here's a list. Let's rattle through these in the maybe 20 minutes or so that we have left. So, number 1, burning yeast or honey in offerings to God. It's just a normal penalty. Now these are things that are things that there are laws against. You can't use yeast or honey in offerings to God. It's just a normal penalty. Number 2, failing to include salt in offerings to God. I wonder what the salt thing is. And you sprinkle salt when you want to close out evil spirits. Interesting, huh? But failing to include salt in offerings to God is just a normal penalty for that. Number 3, eating fat. Any of you have like a steak that you sear in a good chunk of that fat that's on the steak? And we like to trim the fat off, but sometimes the fat gives flavor. Do you buy lean beef or do you buy fatty beef? Making your hamburgers stick together. So that one's eating fat. That's a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Wherever you live, all fat is to be saved for offerings to God. And there's a normal penalty on that. 4, eating blood. It's just a normal penalty. You had to do offerings for it. Failing to testify against any wrongdoing you've witnessed. says you'll be held responsible according to Judaic law. That's failing to testify against wrongdoing that you've witnessed. Failing to testify against any wrongdoing that you've been told about, which sounds like hearsay, but at any rate, they shall be held responsible was the penalty. Touching an unclean animal. Touching the carcass of an unclean animal. So if Rover dies or you're a worker in a pork plant, you're in trouble here. You can't touch either of those dead bodies. Normal penalty. Cleansing penalties is what they were. Carelessly making an oath, even if you don't realize you've done it. It's a penalty. Deceiving a neighbor about something trusted to them. Return the item and a 20% penalty plus normal penalties. Finding lost property and lying about it. That's return the item and a 20% penalty plus a normal penalty just for finding it. Bringing unauthorized fire before God. It says, what's the punishment? God will smite you. So, my solution that would be I just don't bring fire to God. Let the priest do that. Unauthorized fire before God. Letting your hair become unkempt. Did you realize that was in Levitical law? You will die, and God will be angry at everyone. May only apply to the priesthood. If you let your hair become too long. If your hair is too long, there's sin in your heart. Get it cut today and make a new start. Make a new start, oh glory. The rich young ruler came one day to ask about the narrow way. But his hair was too long, oh, his hair was too long, and he couldn't be saved. No, he couldn't be saved. And on the song. Made that up in college. I don't know why I still remember it, because it was stupid. Because we had to get our hair cut short when we were in college. So, Bible college. So, letting your hair become unkempt. Tearing your clothes. It says you're going to die and God will be angry at everyone. And that might have only applied to the priesthood too. Drinking alcohol in holy places. That's a bit of a problem for Catholics. And we do, divine this and that. We drink the blood of Christ. It says you will die. Transubstantiation, right out. That might have only applied to the priesthood. And by the way, in support of this Levitical law, I raised my Mike's hard lemonade, 0 sugar. Oh, that's good. Let's see. Eating an animal. Of course, we're not in a holy place here, but it could be. My shoes are on my feet. Eating an animal which doesn't both chew cud and has divided hooves. You'll be unclean. So in other words, you couldn't eat a camel, you couldn't eat a rabbit, you couldn't eat a pig, etc., etc., etc. Touching the carcass of any of the above. Problems here for rugby. You'll be unclean. Eating or touching the carcass of any seafood without fins or scales. You have to do cleansing rituals at the temple. You'll be unclean. And I just made shrimp stir fry the other night. Very unlevitical. Eating or touching the carcass of the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, and hoopoe, and the bat. If you eat or touch those, the carcass of them, you'll be unclean. You see where the Levitical law is going. We're only through about 19 of them so far. Eating or touching the carcass of flying insects with 4 legs, unless those legs are jointed, like a grasshopper. Just remember John the Baptist ate locusts and wild honey. It says you'll be unclean. Eating any animal which walks on all 4s and has paws. That's great news for cats and dogs. You'll be unclean. It also applies to touching their carcasses. Eating or touching the carcass of the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. You'll be unclean. Eating or touching the carcass of any creature which crawls on many legs or its belly. You'll be unclean. That means no more rattlesnake meat if you're on Naked and Afraid. Going to church within 33 days of after giving birth to a boy. You'll be unclean for a week and then another 33 days. She has to offer up a sacrifice. Going to church within 66 days after giving birth to a girl. Double the time. You're unclean for double the time if you have a little girl. Having sex with your mom. The penalty for all the sexual sins in chapter 18 is that the participants are to be cut off from their people. Some have additional penalties mentioned, which we won't get into all the different penalties for that. But having sex with your mom, it's not something that would ever cross my mind. I don't know. I suppose there's some people who would have sex with their stepmoms, but that's probably not what that means. Or does it? Well, yeah, the next one is having sex with your father's wife. Both are to be put to death. So, guys, if you were living under Levitical law, if you had sex with your father's wife, even if it's not your blood mom, be put to death. So would she. Having sex with your sister. If you marry her, both are to be publicly removed from their people. Having sex with your granddaughter, same penalty. Having sex with your half-sister, same penalty. Having sex with your biological aunt, he'll be held responsible for the dishonor. Having sex with your uncle's wife, all of these are spelled out. With your uncle's wife, they're held responsible for the dishonor. They will die childless. Having sex with your daughter-in-law, both are to be put to death. Having sex with your sister-in-law, if you marry her, you'll be childless. Now, I don't know if this was supposed to be a miraculous thing that took place, if they did some kind of archaic surgery on you, or God would render you childless was the warning. I don't know what it was. Doesn't spell it out. Having sex with a woman and also having sex with her daughter or granddaughter. There's no specific penalty given, but if you marry both of them, all three of you are to be burned in the fire. So the idea there was don't marry him. Marrying your wife's sister while your wife still lives. No penalty given. It's just a law against it. So you're divorced from your wife and you marry your wife's sister. Boy. But didn't Jacob do that? Was it Jacob who was going to marry Rachel? And her dad wanted Leah, the older sister, married off first. She was kind of, the Bible describes her as having a cow face, cow-eyed, cross-eyed, something. And Jacob marries her. He has sex with her to consummate the marriage that night. Wakes up in the morning, finds out it's the older sister, Leah. And he has to work for 7 more years to get Rachel. And he marries Rachel. So he's married them both. But this says you can't marry your wife's sister while your wife still lives. Interesting. Having sex with a woman during her period. Both of them are to be cut off from their people. So if you have sex with a woman while she's menstruating, they'll be banished from your people. Having sex with your neighbor's wife. Both are to be put to death. Giving your children to be sacrificed to Moloch. The person is to be stoned to death. Now, how many of these so far do you agree with or disagree? Let's keep going. See how many are sexual here. Having sex with a man as one does with a woman. So obviously these laws are written to the men. Having sex with a man as one does with a woman. Both are to be put to death. Having sex with an animal. Both are to be killed. Making idols or metal gods. There's no penalty given. Reaping to the very edges of a field. You reap all of your crops all the way to the edge of your field. You're to be that's to be left for the poor, but there's no penalty is given. Picking up grapes that have fallen in your vineyard. That's to be left for the poor. No penalties given. Stealing, no penalty given. Lying, no penalty given. Swearing falsely on God's name, no penalty. Defrauding your neighbor, no penalty. Holding back the wages of an employee overnight, no penalty. Cursing the deaf or abusing the blind, no penalty. Perverting justice, showing partiality either the poor or the rich, no penalty. Spreading slander or gossip, no penalty. Doing anything to engender a neighbor's life, endanger a neighbor's life, no penalty. Seeking revenge or bearing a grudge, no penalty. Mixing fabrics in clothing. You couldn't have wool and flax woven together. That's like saying you can't have a cotton polyester blend shirt, but no penalties given. But there was a law against all of these things. Crossbreeding animals, no penalty, but there's a law against it. Planting different seed in the same field, meaning, I've planted sunflowers here and beans here in the same field. There's a law against it. Sleeping with another man's slave. Due punishment, but not death. Just a ram for sacrifice. So adultery didn't count the same as there wasn't death for adultery if it was done with a slave. Eating fruit from a tree within 4 years of planting the tree. No penalty, but may only apply to fruit trees planted in Israel. Practicing divination or seeking omens. That's astrology. Tisk. No penalty, but they will be cut off from their people by God, and they're to be stoned to death in a different passage. Trimming your beard. No penalty given, but there's a law against it. Do not trim the corners of your beard, it says. Cutting your hair at the sides. Here, no penalty given, but getting tattoos. There was a law against tattoos, but no penalty given. Making your daughter prostitute herself. The land will turn to prostitution. No other penalty is given. Turning to mediums or spiritists. No penalty given. Not standing in the presence of the elderly. No penalty given. Don't mistreat foreigners. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. There's no penalty given. Boy, would that apply today with our border situation the way it is? Interesting. Mistreating foreigners. Oh, I'm sorry, that was it. Mistreating foreigners. Using dishonest weights and scales. There's no penalty given, but you would think that would fall under stealing. I think a lot of these had other categories in other books of the law. Cursing your father or your mother. Death. Marrying a prostitute, divorcee, or a widow if you're a priest. There's laws against all of those things, but no penalty was given. Entering a place where there's a dead body as a priest. If you're a priest, there's no penalty given. Slaughtering a cow, sheep, when it's young on the same day. Might apply to sacrificial animals, no penalty. Working on the Sabbath, no penalty. Blasphemy, punishable by stoning to death. Inflicting an injury, killing someone else's animal, killing a person, must be punished in kind. Killing someone means death. Injuring someone means punishment in kind. Killing or injuring another's animal means punishment in kind. So if you run your horse cart over somebody's dog and it dies, your dog gets killed too. So selling land permanently, there's no penalty given for that. Selling an Israelite as a slave, if you are an Israelite, foreigners are fine, but you don't sell an Israelite. There's no penalty given. So that's quite the list. That was 76 of them right there. And there's not many Bible-believing types of Christians today that would go for all of those laws, but most would consider them some as laudable commandments still applicable today. So in all that list, how about look at all the hullabaloo about homosexuality or gay marriage and things like that. You might not like it, and you say Levitical law is against it. Well, Levitical law also says you can't marry your your sister-in-law. You can't wear a clothing that has two different fabrics woven into it. You can't crossbreed a dog with a different breed of dog. That kind of thing. Well, those aren't for today, but the homosexual one sticks because you don't like it. That's cherry picking. So, if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would help a foreigner and stranger, so they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit. Yeah, that's Leviticus 35 through 37. That's not going to be picked up by anybody today. Very few. So, there's all kinds of things that people comment on this kind of stuff. Where I found this list, hundreds of comments on these things. But it comes down to, what are you going to believe? What do you say you believe? What are you going to support? Maybe you're not Christian or Jewish. You're not a Bible believer as far as your faith goes. Maybe that's something so none of that matters to you anyway. So, interesting stuff, huh? How about this? Let's look at this for the last few minutes we've got. Rules in the Bible that most people don't even know exist. Know about this? There's some people that take the Bible literally. They believe Adam and Eve existed. They believe Noah made an ark and that Jesus rose from the dead. But even biblical literalists find a certain amount of relativity in rules of the Old Testament, as we've already talked about. And there might be some things in the Bible that seem pretty extreme and impractical from a modern perspective. But many Christians argue that several of these rules no longer apply following New Testament and the New Covenant. Say, for instance, there was an Old Testament Levitical law that if you are a rebellious child living in your father's house and your rebellion against your parents was severe, you could drag your kid to the public gate and have the elders stone him to death. Now, I can imagine there are times where I've been mad enough at my kids where I go, I sure wish we could still stone you guys at the gate. But I would never really do that. Could you imagine killing your child for being rebellious? So you got to look at the context. Many of these laws had context, historical context to them. I couldn't imagine any kind of loving parent, even if their child is rebellious, dragging them to the gate of the city and having people stone them to death. I'm going to watch as my child gets beaten to death with rocks. But the Bible doesn't give you much more context than that. How about this law? When fighting another man, chop off his wife's hand if she grabs your genitals. Do you know that's a law in the Old Testament? Deuteronomy 25, 11 through 12 is where you find that. When men strive together one with the other, and the wife of one of them draws near to deliver her husband out of the hand of him that smited him, and puts forth her hand to take him by the secrets, or let's just call it what it is, take him by the nuts, thou shalt cut off her hand. Thine eye shall not pity her. What it means, the secrets here, of course, are genitals. But to cut off her hand, that's literal. And so this sentence on a whole was later interpreted as metaphorical, as a fine of the value of a hand. That's how they interpreted it. But it was written as literally cut her hand off if she grabs the other guy's nuts. Or it's the other guy that could have her. She grabbed me nuts. Cut her hand off. End of fight. How about this one? Women suspected of adultery have to drink dirty water. I was talking about this on Kenny's show. this morning coffee with Kenny, with KB. There were biblical rules about women, adultery, and water that are debated. But the book of Numbers says if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, so that another man has sexual relations with her, and this is hidden from her husband, the priest shall take holy water in a clay jar and put some dust from the tabernacle floor into the water. And then the priest shall say to her, "May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries." That was the penalty. And some people think the dirty water was supposed to cause an abortion. Others think it would pressure the woman into a confession. Regardless, there's no denying the idea was for the alleged adulteress to drink a mix of holy water and tabernacle floor dirt. And the tabernacle, not the temple, because this is tabernacle days was when this was written, before they were in the land and had built the temple. So one of the things that struck me is we've got all these Christian movements, Jewish movements that are against abortion. Yet we have God here saying that if a woman commits adultery and gets pregnant by it, that you should make this potion, this spell, a religious spell, water, holy water, blessed water, a spell, mixed with the dirt from the floor of the tabernacle, and you make her drink it. So either her abdomen swells up or she miscarries the baby. Godly abortion? Is that what that was? Interesting. How about this one? If your slave refuses freedom, pierce their ear. That was a law. Exodus, the second book in the Old Testament, makes the following provision about how to treat an enslaved person. And if the servant shall plainly say, "I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free," then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he'll bring him to the door or under the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. There's implications. A lot of commentarians comment on this from these verses, asserting that the mark was intended to attest to permanent servitude and the forfeiture of any rights afforded to a free man. There are mixed assessments about whether this was a choice made by the enslaved person or it was a form of punishment for not choosing to be free. Then we already mentioned this one kind of. Don't wear clothes made of both linen and wool. You shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seeds. Neither shall a garment mingled of linen and wool come upon thee. That's interesting. But wool and linen were appointed for the priests alone. So another one thought that mixing this was brings on malignant fevers and exhausts the strength back in those days. Don't sit where a menstruating woman has sat. Now, maybe back in those days, the kind of clothing they used to wear, the robes, the loose garments, maybe this was a cleanliness thing. I don't know. If a woman have an issue or menstruating, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall put apart 7 days. Whosoever toucheth her shall be unclean until the even. Now, by the way, so 7 days out of every 28, a woman was considered unclean. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. So there you go. Periods were thought to be unclean. Another law, you can't kill a burglar during the day. If the sun's risen on him, he shall not shed his blood during the day. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, and he should make full restitution. And if he doesn't have anything, then he has to be sold for his theft into slavery. So, how about that? Don't plant more than one kind of seed in a field. We kind of covered that. Never boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. What are we going to do this weekend, dear? I don't know. I thought maybe we'd boil some goats in their mother's milk. Seems odd, doesn't it? Probably customary food thing. Don't tear your clothes. We covered that one. Don't eat fat. Make sure no one falls off of your roof. And don't bring blood on your house by letting someone fall off of your roof. Don't eat owls. Don't speak the names of other gods. And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect. Make no mention of the name of other gods. Neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. Pretty straightforward. You have to leave fallen grapes on the ground for the poor to eat. And you can't leave open pits around for animals to fall into. Remember Jesus when he said unloved, they were chiding him for picking corn on the Sabbath to eat out of the section of the fields that were left for the poor. And he said, it's the Sabbath, they said. You're breaking the Sabbath. And Jesus said, if an animal falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not pull it out? So, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Weird laws of the Old Testament. There's a lot more that can be talked about this, a lot more principle. But for now, you know what we got to do? We got to get out of here with the radio audience. Radio audience, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Stick around for the captain's cabin. Live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here. The vast mateys, welcome to the captain's cabin. Thank you for being here for the show tonight. And if any of you don't know this already, this is the after show. This is what we do after the main show. And sometimes we're here for an hour, sometimes we're here for 5 minutes. All depends on where the after show takes us. So I'm glad you enjoyed the show tonight. Thanks for being here, everybody. And if you wanted to call in and talk about the show, now's the time to do that. We can't take calls during the show till we get that fixed one of these days. You can tell it's a major priority of mine. I just haven't done it yet. So we can get it fixed so we can do it during the show if we need to. But Johan, you're saying that card looked like Reinhardt. You mean Rainy Heart? I'm not sure which one you were talking about. But you talking about the Ancient Heroes cards? There are a couple of those that that had Rainy kind of as a model for that. So, everybody, I'm glad you were here tonight. Thanks. We're kind of getting back into the swing of doing the show more public than we were doing it for a couple of months. And Johan, I'm not sure which one you meant. Was it the Ancient Heroes ad? Let me just look at that quick. Let's just play that again. It's only about, how long is it? It's 55 seconds. Let's take a look at it again. Hold on. Let's see what you were seeing. Oh, maybe that one right there, huh? That opening card? Was that the one, the opening card? That's supposed to be Deborah or Deborah. Oops, I almost ended the stream right there. Hit the wrong button. Yeah, the first card. That's Deborah and Barak. She was a judge of Israel, if you're not familiar with her story. And she was called the wife of Labrador. Labido, I think it was. Labadot. And if I'm pronouncing that right, I got to look back and refresh my memory. But they always thought, oh, this is who this woman is. She was some guy's wife. No, wife of Labido, the wife of fire. That was a word that was interpreted as fire, fieriness. She was strong. She was a prophetess. She was a judge of Israel. She was a leader of the Israelite people before the monarchy. And she was a woman of fire, she was called. I don't know what she looked like, but I drew her kind of Rainy-esque, but I gave her, the dark hair, the Middle Eastern look. And so, yeah, that was it. That's who that was. Deborah. And then Barak was the general that fought for Israel, and she ordered him to take his men and go fight. So she was not a hard woman. She was what would you call her? What's a good word for it? She was as presidential as any president you'd want, as kingly as any king or queen. But this was pre-monarchy, so she was a judge, she was called. So quite the powerful woman of fire. So anyway, I would not want to have lived under all those laws in Old Testament Israel. Just not my thing, living under that kind of stuff. I'd be like, now there are some interpretations of all of that say some of them were nonsensical laws in the context of the day, but why? Because it said that God called his people to be a peculiar people, was the word used, or ones that were different than the rest of the world. And this was the way he did it. This is God's way. I'm asking you to do this way. I saw one author that I read in prepping for this tonight. She was a woman that was talking about some of the rules that women had to abide by. And she said at the end of her article, she said something to the effect of, she said, how many of us, if God were to appear before us and say, now I want you to raise your left hand and do this with it. Then I want you to raise your right hand and do this with it. Then I want you to hop on one leg. She said, how many of us would do that because God's asking us to do it? Probably everybody. So now the buffering stops after the main show. That figures, Elderberry, doesn't it? So, well, you can always go back and see it. It'll be up in the archives tonight yet. So, and you should be able to see even the chat that was going on. Though you can't chat, you can't interact with the chat anymore because it's all recorded. But you can at least see it. So, anyway, I'm going to take another sip of my Mike's hard lemonade, sugar-free. I didn't even drink half of this during the show. But it's pretty good. I like it. So, you can see by my, I'm just looking at some of the comments here. I don't have much else to say. I'm kind of talked out. But I'm glad you made it to the show too, Johan. Rudy is gone. He's out. Johan is stoned to death, burned at the stake, put in a FEMA camp for not getting the jab. There you go. Yeah, I'd get stoned to death for something. I'm sure of it. So, Susie Q, oh my goodness. I don't know what you were saying that too. I know several Jews that eat whatever. Yeah, I do too. I've got part of the family that we don't associate anymore just because we just all lost touch during the years. It was my grandfather, who you all know about because I've talked about him before. And if you haven't, my mom's dad was her stepdad, married her mother right after World War II. I think my mom was born in 42 during the war. And then when he got out of the war, he married my mom's mom. And I always grew up with him. He was our grandfather. He was my mom's dad her whole life. And he was a Jewish man. His whole side of the family was Jewish. Synagogue, all of this, everything. I knew his mother when I was a young boy. She was a Jew from the old country, from Hungary. And we used to go visit her at the Jewish nursing home, the rest home. It was called the Shalom Home. And we'd go and see her, and she'd always be like, she'd see me when I'd come in. My grandpa would bring us in, and, oh, Scotty, she'd say like that. Oh, from my lips to God's ears, you've grown. Oh, come in. And she always give me a big kiss on the cheek and stuff. She passed away when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, something like that. She was quite elderly. But that was the whole side of our family. And I was responding to something here that I know several Jews that eat whatever. I've gone out with he would have been my cousin or my second cousin? About my age. He was in advertising. Made great money in advertising, was higher up in advertising. And I remember it was a long time ago now, 30 years ago. We met for lunch once, and we talked when my aunt died because they were all at the funeral. And when my grandpa died, they were all at the funeral. And we went out and we talked about advertising and stuff. And I asked him what he believed as a Jew. You're a Jew. What do you believe? And he says, well, mostly, he says, we're in it for the family. He says, it's a family thing. It's a uniting thing, a fellowship thing. And he says, we're not Orthodox by any means. I think they were Reformed Jew or something like that. So it was an interesting conversation, but that's kind of the way they were. Hey, there's Uncle John in the wings. Let's bring him in for a few minutes. Uncle John.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm all right. What's going on?
Oh, I was just listening to your program about chopping hands off and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So if you're in a fight with another guy, don't let your wife grab him by the nuts.
Nah, absolutely.
At least not under Levitical law.
Yeah.
So there's that. So, yeah, interesting stuff. I just thought I'd make a good lighthearted show, even though those are pretty dire topics when you thought about it. I wouldn't have wanted to live under Levitical law. Now, there is an interesting thing in Christianity. They said Didn't Christ condone the law himself? And remember, Jesus himself said, I am not come to do away with the law, but to be the fulfillment of the law. And he says, I am the fulfillment of the law as the Messiah, as the Christ. And he also said something about the law was a schoolmaster to teach us all that there was nothing good we could do to attain God's favor. It had to be done through the Messiah, the kinsman redeemer. Had to be done through, at the time, through the sacrificial system in Judaism. You had to go to temple and do temple stuff and all that. Hey, Ryan
Until
Gale.
the time of the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes. And so he became, that's why they call him the Lamb of God. He became the perfect lamb when you were to bring a lamb every year to the temple to atone for sin. And that's why Jesus was supposed to be the Lamb of God. And so, you have to look into it, the whole thing. You start studying it a little bit, you find, all Christianity is a sect of Judaism. It's Judaism fulfilled. So Jesus said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. And
they tried to trap him in the law.
Yeah.
And he told them, let he among you who has not sinned cast the first stone.
Yeah. Johann, I don't know if I would so much categorize Jesus as a martyr. Although you could look at it that way. And again, I don't understand the way God wanted to do things. If this is the truth, as we read it in the New Testament, I don't understand why God would want to do it that way. But he created humans, gave them the ability to choose to serve him or not serve him, choose to obey his rules or not obey them, and he gave them free will. But once they expressed that free will, all of a sudden, they need a savior. And from the time of Adam and Eve, you've got the prophecies in the Old Testament all the way through of the kinsman redeemer, the one who would be one of us redeemer, which ultimately was the same thing that the Messiah was. And when the Messiah came, the Messiah was to be the kinsman redeemer and the one that would bring us back into favor with a holy God. And so Jesus, if you believe he is the Messiah, which Jews don't really believe that, do they? Although there are Jewish Christians out there. You'll say, that's how can you have a Jewish Christian? Contradiction of terms. Well, no, it's not, because Christianity is just a sect of Judaism that believes the Messiah has come, while the other ones don't. The rest of them don't. And so,
give or take a little Roman meddling.
Right, a little Roman meddling, and of course, very interesting stories with all of that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't think the only reason you have Rome involved at all, and again, people say, "Oh, this sounds so anti-Semitic." It's not. It's just history. The only reason the Romans were involved in the crucifixion of Jesus at all was because Judea was a vassal state of Rome. And you could not, in the Roman Empire, you could not execute anyone without the express permission of the Roman governor. Roman governor had to sign death warrants. And so it was the Jewish ruling body, the temple ruling body, the Sanhedrin, that arrested Jesus. They wanted Jesus out of the way because he was affecting temple profits. And not profits, P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, but P-R-O-F-I-T-S. And they wanted him out of the way. And too many people following him. And maybe some sincerely believed he's committing blasphemy. He claims he's the Messiah. He claims he equated himself with God. That's blasphemy. So they wanted to put him to death. But they couldn't do it without the permission of the Roman governor. Who was the Roman governor? Pontius Pilate. That's an historical fact, by the way, now. People used to think Pilate was part of the Jesus myth. It's been proven that he existed. many different things. I always hail back to the cornerstone of Pilate, found at Caesarea Philippi, up on the north shore of the over between Galilee and the Mediterranean, the governor, seat of the governor in Judea. And they found his inscription on a cornerstone back in 1964. That sits in the Jerusalem Museum today. But anyway, that aside, the Sanhedrin couldn't kill Jesus, execute him legally without a writ of execution from the governor. That's why they brought him to Pilate. What does Pilate do? Pilate examines him, and he goes, I don't find any fault in this guy. I don't find a reason to execute him. And what did they eventually say to him that same night? Because he went back and forth. Because Pilate said, take him to Herod, who was the puppet king established by Rome. Idumean he was. And they take him to, and that's where they beat him, and they put the robe on him, and they send him back to Pilate. Pilate's like, what the fuck? You could just hear him. Why are you sending this guy to me again? I already told you I don't find any fault in him. And that's when the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling body, said, if you don't give us a writ of execution, we'll tell Caesar, we'll write to Caesar and tell him that you supported this guy who claims he's a king in Judea. And Pilate's like, what? And they said, we don't want any other king. We only see Caesar as our only king, which is a bunch of hypocrisy because they wanted nothing more than to get out from under Roman rule. But so Pilate got really pushed into a hard place. And there were other historical facts around that. That's why he washed his hands of the matter. He says, fine, here's your writ of execution. Wash my hands of it. He didn't need to have any bad blood with Caesar at this point, because he was living at a time where a lot of people were being put to death by Caesar Tiberius, because Tiberius had grown and he had a political faction in his ear that was telling him, these are all the people you need to be put to death because they aren't going along with they want to take over the empire from you. And Tiberius was old and in his dotage. And a bunch of allies of Pontius Pilate's were all put to death. L. Aelius Sejanus being one of the main ones that appointed Pilate his prefecture, and he was Caesar's right-hand man, while Caesar's off on the Isle of Capri, filming the movie Caligula. That was the time period. And so I'm sure Pilate was pretty much warned, better mind your P's and Q's with Caesar. You could be next. And so he just did what Caesar told him to do. He didn't want to create waves. And I think he got forced into giving them, the Sanhedrin, the writ for death. Then he washed his hands of it. And they took him and they crucified him. And the Romans had to do it because they had to perform the executions. But I don't think Jesus, as we know, there were two other guys, but crucifixion was a pretty big executory industry back then, if you will. Not an industry, but it was every day. There were permanent scaffolds erected outside the city walls where you would carry the crossbeam. Then you'd be beaten. You'd carry the crossbeam to the site. They'd nail your wrists to the crossbeam, raise you up on a rope, and drop you into the upright on the scaffolding, dislocating your shoulders. They'd push your knees up against your chest, nail the feet into the upright, and that's where you died. And you pretty much died of suffocation, they said. That's why they'd come by and break the legs. After a certain number of hours, they'd come by with a big club and break the legs of the convicts being executed, so they couldn't push up on the shoulders out of joint to take breaths anymore. And their diaphragms constricted, and of course they were losing blood. They died. So interesting stuff. So Jesus was Caesar, said Sterling Brew. I don't know about that. Ruthless. Yeah, it's a pretty ruthless way to go. I know I love that when it came to the law, the Pharisees always tried to trip him up. And these are stories, of course, and they become so commonplace. We think of them as, oh, these are the storybook fairy tales about Jesus. But I think they were just accounts of things that happened. And we've been recited them so many times. The Pharisees were trying to trip him up once, and in front of the crowd, they said, to whom should we pay taxes to Caesar? Trying to trip him up. We talk about taxes all the time. And so they tried to trip him up with taxes. And he said, who's got a coin? He says, show me a coin. He picks up the coin. He says, whose image is on the coin? And they said, Caesar's. And he gives the coin back, and he says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and to God what's God's. He didn't tell them not to pay their taxes, and he didn't tell them to pay their taxes. Just put your heart in the right place. So, Johan says, I hope I die in my sleep. Yeah, after hearing a story about crucifixion, I don't think I ever want to be crucified. And of course, a Roman scourging, which you got before crucifixion, there was a law that was to be, I think it was 40 lashes save one, because 40 meant certain death. So they would only give you 39. And these scourges, I can't remember what it was called. I illustrated one for a guy's book on crucifixion. They were like cat o' nine tails, but they had 3 fronds, a handle with 3 leather thongs on them. And there were 3 bits of metal on the end of each one of those thongs, spaced apart by about an inch. And so you had 9 of these little chunks of metal hitting your skin as you're getting whipped. And it had the ability to literally rip a body to shreds. And if you didn't die from shock and loss of blood, you died from suffocation on the cross. So, heads I win, tails you lose. It's a trap. Yeah, pretty much, Johan. Love you too, Sterling. What else was I going to say about that with the crucifixion? It was, it was a bloody way to go. Cruel times. And
everything about those times were cruel.
Yeah. I remember I watched a pretty good movie. It's a comic, The Life of Brian. Monty Python's The Life of Brian. And the church hated that movie because it was a mockery of Jesus. And it really wasn't. But it was a play on the satire that you could have made around the whole political scene. Brian was a guy that was mistaken for a Messiah in Israel and just follows his life. Jesus was a character you never even saw. He was there, but Pontius Pilate was there. There was crucifixion, and it was all comedy, and it was played comically. But the way they filmed the movie was done like, it was made not long after that. Remember that mini-series with Robert Powell playing Jesus? It was Jesus of Nazareth that came out in the mid-'70s on TV. And it was so gloriously realistic, from the costuming, the lived-in costuming, the settings, the buildings, the Roman uniforms, the everything was so on the mark, realistic, gritty realism. And they used that in The Life of Brian, that same kind of look. And it was pretty well done. If you've never seen the movie, it's worth watching just for the comic effect of it. But there was one scene where Brian ends up getting railroaded and he's going to be crucified. And they show this line of prisoners in chains coming through the prison. And there's a Roman with a clipboard. It's Michael Palin from Monty Python. And as each man comes up to him, he pulls up his clipboard and he goes, crucifixion or emancipation? And the guy, well, crucifixion. He goes, yes. He makes a check mark and he goes, cross beams are to the left, take the line to the right. And then they go through several guys and they come up to one guy and right in the head of Brian, he goes, crucifixion or emancipation? And he goes, emancipation. And he goes, "Oh, well, good for you." He says, "Well, take the line to the left. You go." He goes, "Oh, no, I'm just pulling your leg. It's crucifixion." He goes, "Oh, you almost got me." He says, "Take a cross beam, line to the right." And then Brian is up there, of course, next. And he gets crucified. And that's where they're all hanging on the cross at the end. And Brian's kind of, he's crucified. And the one guy on the cross next to him says, that's where that song comes in. Always look on the bright side of life. And, always look on the bright side of life. And they whistle. And so it's the movie is not a mockery of Jesus, believe it or not. It was taking an historical event and going through. They had these scenes with all the different political fronts in the Jewish political fronts that were taking place. The anti-Roman league, the this league, the that league, and they're all arguing about who should be what. And it was about false messiahs as much as it was about the Messiah. And I love the one scene where Michael, who was it? John. Why am I slipping on his name? John
Cleese.
Cleese. John Cleese was one of the, and they all played all different roles in these movies, but he played a Roman centurion who is kind of like walking the beat at night, like a cop. And he catches Brian. He's trying to prove his worth to this anti-Roman league or something, and he's painting "Romans Go Home" on the wall at night. And it's done in Latin. He's spelling Latin. And John Cleese, of course, walks up behind him, twirling his little thing, like a cop walking the beat. And he stops him and he says, "What's all this then?" And he says, "Oh," and he starts parsing his Latin. No, you've got it all wrong. He says, "I want you to write this the right way for me." He has him covering the whole wall over the next hour, filling it up with "the Romans go home" and why this tense isn't the right tense in Latin and so on. And it's a very comic scene. So if you haven't seen the movie, it's worth watching just for the good comedy and the good production value of the movie. So Johan. Oh, Barbie D has to go. Another good show. She says, "Take care, everybody." Good night, Barbie D. Good to have you here.
Ruben wouldn't be out there watching, would he?
I don't know. Ruben, are you out there watching? He tried to call in the other night, and I saw his call come in, and I was talking, and then I went to bring him in, and he was gone already. So.
I had wanted to ask him if the first people had stories of giants like you find all through the Middle East and Europe. And
yeah, I think they do. I had written in one of my own books about it and going through some of the comparative mythologies. Bigfoot or Sasquatch, even the older versions of Sasquatch before we knew it as Sasquatch, were these giant hairy men in Native American culture. So interesting stuff.
Yeti in Asia.
Yep. All of those. So interesting stuff. Let's see.
Do you suppose Gigantopithecus was still roaming around?
Maybe. Don't know. What's the big footprint that they found? That what looks like a footprint. It's got all the toes, and it's in a piece of petrified rock that is up at this angle now. And it's the footprint's about 6 feet long. And it was in obviously wet mud that had petrified, but with tectonic shifts and so on, it had moved it up, and it's standing like upright against, and you can see the whole landscape is like that there. But and it ages out, it's old as the rock there. So it's interesting. I don't know.
So many interesting things.
I know.
How do you get mud cast footprints of something like a brontosaurus?
I don't know.
Being followed by footprints of human hunters.
Right.
And and they go, oh, well, the shale just softened up again and the people came through following the footprints.
Right.
Like, that's less likely than we don't know everything about how long man's been around.
Right, exactly. We don't. And I think we're all wrong about some things, obviously.
Uh-huh.
So, and then there's some things where I think we're probably way off in our scientific, where you have the three-toed, like, Jurassic Park has done this for us, the movies, the footprint of like the raptors or a T-Rex, the three-toed thing. And then you see human footprints going across the same mud cast. They were cast at the same time because the mud dried at the same time and became petrified. So what is that? Where'd that come from? So that to me is very interesting stuff. So I was looking to see if I could find a good picture of this footprint. There's giant human footprints have been found. This isn't the same one, but this is in China, and it's in rock. So it's petrified into rock, which I find very interesting. I'm going to show you this picture. But this would be, I don't know exactly how old it is. I could read the article, but I haven't read it yet. This was just found in China. And giant human footprint. And so they're asking, is this Bigfoot? Were it giants in the earth and so on? Did somebody carve it? But here, this is the, let me show you this picture. Tell me what you think of this. Import, upload. Let me go find this. Hang on. Where I put it, giant human footprint. Okay, this is loading up into my broadcast here. Take a look at this. See what you think of this. So, something like that.
Wow,
that's found in petrified rock, and I want to see what they say about this. Oh, this is on Snopes. It just says it's unproven. In September 2016, numerous conspiracy-minded websites published near-identical stories describing the alleged discovery of a giant fossilized human footprint in China. An example of such an article can be found on the website strangesounds.org, which stated that on August 24, 2016, a giant human footprint was discovered fossilized in a rock in Pingyan village in China's southwestern province of Guizhou. And one of the huge footprints discovered is 57 centimeters long, or 20 centimeters wide and 3 centimeters deep. So it's very interesting. There's another shot of it here from above without the guy standing in it, and you see all the different shapes of the bottom of the foot. It was pressed into mud and became petrified rock. So, very interesting stuff. This isn't the one I was referring to. There's one in the United States here that's touted quite a bit. So, is that a real thing? I don't know. So, all I know is this, is that, what's the quote from Shakespeare? There is more to your philosophies than, it's basically, there's more to what you think than meets the eye. Only in Shakespeare. What did he say? Who did he say that to? Horatio? Dear Horatio, there is more. It's going to bother me now. Hold on. I should know this. Somebody can quote it. More to
something about more
philosophies
than your in all your philosophies have dreamt of.
There are more things in heaven and earth. Horatio. Yes, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And those words are amongst the most quoted in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And they're set up against a whole list of other now ubiquitous phrases and quotations, including "hoist with one's own petard," or "more honored in the breach than the observance." "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." Some of those quotes all came from Hamlet. So there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. So there you go. Well, John, it is 10:37.
Indeed.
I'm going to call it a night. And you and I, we need to talk. I should probably give you a call tomorrow about other things.
Indeed.
And other business matters that we need to talk about Uncle Dave.
Yeah.
And so I'll probably give you a call tomorrow. And let's see what
One
else we got.
second.
Yeah.
I just. Let's see. Is that focused?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was a ship Dave was telling me about that he was building, or a model that he got. Look at that. Wow.
It needs a little work.
Yeah. You going to finish it up?
No, I think you are.
Oh, you want me to finish it? All right. I could probably try that.
I told you there was I had something here for you that when it was done would look nice in your office.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll do my best to honor what Dave started there. So,
Indeed.
thanks, brother. Well, and on that note, let's talk tomorrow, because I got some other things to talk to you about, figure things out, talk about current status of things and how we're doing and what we're doing, and take it from there. So, still miss Uncle Dave. All of you listeners, I still miss Dave every day. I think about him quite often. And there's hardly, I can't go through this office without something reminding me of Dave. I've got the lights down here from Dave that he gave me.
I'm living in his old bedroom. So
yeah, you're living in his own bedroom. So he's surrounding you. I got all kinds of stuff. The masks he made, the swords. Whenever I pick up a sword, I think of Dave. I got those two behind me. All the stuff. Half of my books are things that we would talk about all the time. And pictures I keep finding. I got to hang these lights one of these days. My theater lights that he gave me. So anyway, there you go.
There we are.
So everybody, yeah. You're going to say something
Wherever
else,
you go, there you are.
There you are. There you are. All right. Well, let's call it a night. John, I will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for coming on. You have a good night, brother. I'm going to let you go.
Indeed.
Good night. And everybody else, thank you for being here. Thanks for being part of the show. Coming into the after show tonight. Sometimes it gets really hopping in here. We had Uncle John and several other people on here the other night. Tonight, a little quieter, middle of the week. But we'll be back again on Friday, and we'll see what we do on Friday. I don't even know what we're talking about yet on Friday. We'll talk about something fun and cool, and then we'll have the Captain's Cabin afterwards. We'll see what a Friday night brings us. So all of you, thanks for coming on board. Thanks for being here. See you Friday. Live long and prosper.